So thanks everyone for coming today. This is the second of our youth series that we've been running. So we're going to focus on preventing alcohol-related harm today amongst youth. So thanks everyone for coming. We've also got some people on webinar, so thanks to everyone for joining in online today. As we go through, please feel free to send your questions through and we'll vocalise them to the crowd and then we'll answer them as the speakers go through. So before we start, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of this land and their elders past, present and future. So just some quick housekeeping here. You might have noticed there's toilets just through the back door there, or you can go around the back here and around to your right. In case of an emergency, please go back down the stairs and out to the car park there near Lake Munga, and then we'll be told what to do from there. Like any presentations, please make sure your phones are switched to silent. And we'll also be taking some photos throughout the morning. So if you have a problem with that, please let Alison or myself know. We'll just be using them for social media. Cool. So a quick overview of the day. I'm Rasheen, by the way, I'm not Alison. So first of all, we'll have Simone talk to us, and then Julia, and then Kelly. So a quick overview of who we are if you haven't heard of us before. So we've been around for about 26 years at Injury Matters, and we have a vision for creating a safer place for people to live here in WA. So we want to work together to reduce the impact of injury across the state, and we do this through three main programs. So Stay on Your Feet, Road Trauma and No Injury. So Stay on Your Feet focus on educating community members about how to prevent slips, trips and falls, and we've been running that since 2001, and that's funded by the Department of Health in WA. Road Trauma Support has been around for 5 years. We just celebrated our anniversary the other week, and they provide information, education and free counselling services to people who have been affected by road trauma. And today we're delivering this session through the No Injury program. So we provide different resources, training and networking opportunities for people in working in injury prevention and community safety. So just quickly, the No Injury program centres on three core concepts. We want people to know about different injury topics and how to prevent them. We want to learn, so we want to teach people how they can do something to prevent these issues. So we do this through the training sessions that we're running today and also different resources. And we really want the sector as a whole to connect with each other. So the third focal point is connect. So we do this through different networking groups, and we also have an e-directory on our website. So first of all, this morning we've got Simone. So Simone Pettigrew works at Curtin University in the School of Psychology, and she's also the director of the Western Australian Cancer Prevention Research Unit that's co-funded by Curtin and the Cancer Council of WA. Her work focuses on encouraging people to modify their lifestyle behaviours to improve individual and societal level health outcomes, particularly in terms of reducing cancer risk. Alcohol is a primary area of this research due to its high levels of alcohol consumption and alcohol-related harm in Australia. Perfect. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Hi everyone. So yes, from Curtin University, two hats, research professor in the School of Psychology and WA Cancer Prevention. And that might sound a bit weird about, well, what's cancer prevention got to do with alcohol? Most people don't actually realise that alcohol is what's called a group 1 carcinogen. So there is no doubt anymore that alcohol causes cancer. It definitely does. It's just a matter of risk level. And part of our onus then is on educating the general public and different segments of the public that are most at risk about the kinds of things they can do to reduce the potential for harm by reducing their intake. It's a really hard message to sell in Australian culture because we're alcohol saturated and everyone likes their drink. So we are pretty much called the fun police because we're there trying to say across various areas. So we've got alcohol, tobacco, nutrition, physical activity, sun exposure, rethink what you're doing and what would the guidelines say and how should you be acting in your own best interest. And with alcohol, that's a particularly hard sell. Now, you guys are probably already aware of the NHMRC guidelines around alcohol. So we have that alcohol harm over a lifetime concept. So that's on average, we shouldn't be drinking more than 2 drinks per day. So no more than 14 per week. And in terms of short-term injury, which is the kind of harm that you're probably focusing on most, in any single drinking occasion, the recommendation is no more than 4 standard drinks. Now, standard's a key word there, isn't there? Because we often fill our champagne glasses right up or red wine or beer. and we don't realise that's actually 1.5 or potentially 2 standard drinks. So you can hit that level of 4 pretty quickly, and we do a lot of research with a lot of young people, and to them that number of 4 standard drinks they think is completely unreasonable. That's way too small. On a standard drinking occasion, they drink a lot more than that. So their starting point is up here, and we're coming in with a message that's way down here. So again, it's a really hard sell. You have to work all the way through the guidelines to page 36, where it's basically the same message as tobacco now as it is for alcohol, which is every drinking occasion is building your risk of harm. And again, that's a hard message to sell. These are the 2009 guidelines, and they're currently under review. And the word on the street is that they're going to be more stringent next time around again. Each time they come out as being a little bit more stringent. So again, we're going to need to try and communicate an even stronger message in the future. So we've got good news and we've got bad news when it comes to people's drinking in Australia. The Australian government has been tracking regularly over time how much we're drinking, and they do it in the context of those 2 guidelines we just looked at, your long-term harm, so your 2 drinks a day thing, and this is what it looks like. So we can see that if we track over time, these different columns are different years where they've done the data collection. For our target groups, they unfortunately didn't have 2001 data for the really young group, but we're seeing good trends. Their alcohol consumption is coming down over time. That group is getting a lot of education in schools and through other methods, which means they're starting to get the message about the fact that if you drink too much, it's not good for you. And I've sort of drawn a line there at where our 18 to 24-year-olds are at, and you can see that they're not the worst by a long shot. Those of us middle-aged people, we're letting the side down. We're kind of hovering still around levels that are higher than young people, and we're not really decreasing over time. So in fact, in a lot of ways, our job is harder to sell this message to the middle-aged people than it is to the younger people. However, even there, if we're looking at, about 18% of 18 to 24-year-olds drinking at that harmful level, when we think about the fact that the brain is still developing until the early 20s, it's actually a worst case scenario for them that they're drinking at that level. So we still need to be conscious of pulling that down as much as possible. And the worst news is here in terms of that 4 drinks per single drinking occasion guideline. You can see that our young people, if we draw the line there, at this point in time are significantly worse than the rest of the population. So binge drinking is a real thing, and it's happening out there, and we need to be doing what we can to decrease that habitual pastime of going out with your mates and drinking quite a lot, because that's when people get injured. Now, if we want to look at reducing people's alcohol consumption, and particularly around those binge drinking sessions, we've got the 3 A's that we need to focus on. Affordability, so pricing. Some of the work that Julia and her team have done show that you can buy a standard drink for 23 cents if you buy it in a cask pack. That's ridiculously cheap. That's cheaper than bottled water. So our young people have ready access to very cheap alcohol en masse. Accessibility, you can buy alcohol in many, many different places, and we know amongst our young people there's a big pre-drinking trend, so they go and they buy their 23 cents a litre, a standard drink beverage from a bottle shop, and they'll go and drink a lot before they even go out. And availability, it's in many, many different locations where it's not quite as bad as tobacco, but there are still lots of places you can buy alcohol whenever you want it. And they've got increasingly now, like in Victoria, Uber can deliver you alcohol. So if you're over the limit, you can't drive out to go and get it, you can get Uber to come and bring it to you at home instead. All right, so I come from a commerce economics background, and we talk about alcohol marketing in a way that kind of deals with those 3 A's. I'm going to talk you through what we call the 4 P's. Now, the difficulty we have in that the good old days, the 4 P's were really quite separate and succinct, and so you could come up with different strategies to deal with each of them. In this new media environment, they're all kind of blurring together, which makes it much more difficult for those of us who are trying to come up with effective campaigns. Who here has encountered Little Fat Lamb alcohol products? Yeah, most of you would not be the target group for this particular beverage, so don't be surprised if you're not particularly aware of it. But as you can see, even the product itself, the kind of packaging they're using, it looks like soft drink bottles. So if you go into a bottle shop to buy that, you might not be aware of the fact that you're actually buying alcohol. In terms of promotion, this is all becoming really difficult as well. So here is a billboard ad for Jim Beam products, where they're linking it with social media apps, and the more you buy, the more you can integrate it with your app to develop up different musical themes of your own. I have no idea how it works because I'm a dinosaur and that's not the kind of stuff I do. But for young people, that's very appealing, the way that they're mixing up these different forms of promotion. In terms of place, we now have alcohol being advertised pretty much everywhere. It's very, very in your face, and I'll talk more about that in a moment. But this is at Coles on the checkout when you go to buy your food. So they're scanning your food and you're being promoted to at the checkout for specials on, in this case, high alcohol level products. And then in terms of pricing, we've already talked about the fact that it's so cheap, but not only by specific products, but here we've got suburbs going into price war. Which venue in Subiaco is selling beer the cheapest? So rather than focusing on quality in this product, they're really focusing on price discounting. The more sales, the better. I'm going to focus now a little bit on the advertising aspect of it because it's really reaching young people to a large extent, and they like to think that they're immune to advertising, but they're definitely not. This is the global spend on advertising in the world. So we're looking at $724 billion that's spent on advertising. The message to take out from this is that because it is such a massive industry, there is no way in the world there is that level of expenditure on something that doesn't work. There is a direct pathway to advertising dollars and sales revenue, and that's well known across the business world. So the fact that we can see so much advertising going on is telling us within the alcohol industry, they're getting good bang for their buck from that. Now, TV is still the largest single medium today, but the forecasts are that by 2020, the expenditure is actually going to go more onto internet relative to TV. This is bad news for us because when they promote to young people over the internet, most of us don't get to see it. It's so targeted and it's so ephemeral that by the time, if we even figure out it's there, it's already gone. But they've shared it amongst their networks if they make it nice and quirky, and it proliferates in ways that we can't control and we can't measure. So that's quite scary for us from a health promotion point of view. Advertising is a real science. There are multiple journals that are out there publishing intensive research data on what makes people tick. How do you promote messages that get into people's brains and make them change their behavior? These journals have been around for a long time, most of them, but we're getting new ones as well. This one, International Journal of Advertising and Marketing to Children. So it's a science around how do children's brains work and how do we promote to them in ways that enhance our sales. And that's not around how do we promote health messages. That's around how do we promote commercial products such as alcohol. And then if you want to get really scared, they use MRI machines to look at the effects of advertising, and they can see which parts of the brain flare when they are shown different kinds of ads, different kinds of product packaging, and they do it with kids as well. So they know exactly how well different kinds of messages are working with different target groups. That's what we have to compete with in terms of trying to provide counter messages. We don't have the budget to test our messages on MRI machines. It's extortionately expensive. So they're out there way ahead of us. Something else to keep in mind that the private sector is very, very aware of is that most of the assessment that we can do about how our messaging works activates the conscious brain. So we ask people, have you seen this message? Do you believe it? Has it changed the way you think about the product? Have you bought more since you've seen it, etc.? But that really, really is the tip of the iceberg. And over the last decade, there's been increasing awareness of the fact that a lot of our processing is actually happening at the subconscious level. And this was one of the seminal studies. So it's a wee bit fuzzy, sorry, but you can probably see here, this is just an image of a girl sitting at a bus stop with a bag of products. And here they've taken the Dasani water and popped it outside of the bag on the bench. So they exposed in experimental conditions a whole bunch of people to these different pictures. And lo and behold, when they sent them out to go and access food and beverages that were sitting outside the room, they didn't know it was an experiment. They didn't know they were being tested. The rate at which people selected the Dasani beverage was substantially and significantly higher amongst people who had just been exposed to that message, that image on the left. So just exposure without explicit promotion is enough to substantially change our behaviour, which is truly scary, which is why we're seeing a lot of product placement happening now. You'll see alcohol ads embedded into things like MTV video clips. The alcohol's there, the brand name is clear and apparent. It's because they know that's one of the most effective ways to sell a product. In this particular experiment, they also did variations where they tried comparing that subtle, the product is here, but we're not going to mention it, versus exposing people to an explicit ad. And that subtle exposure worked a lot better in changing people's behaviour than the explicit ad. So I think we're going to see more and more of alcohol products just sort of emerging in the background of places. And you'll already see that in installations at rock concerts and festivals. They'll just have the products there in the background. They'll have people wandering around wearing the T-shirts and the caps. It's just embedding into people's subconscious in a way that's way more effective than really explicit promotion. So again, very scary. We did some work for the federal government looking at all the data that's out there on how advertising affects children, and Julia was part of the team that looked at that. And just to give you the basic summary of the hundreds of pages of research summaries, the earlier kids are exposed to alcohol promotion in any of its forms, the earlier they start drinking, the more they drink, and the larger amounts they drink, so therefore the greater risk of harm for them. So we have parents who say things like, I'll just give them a little bit at home in a safe environment so that they'll get used to it and learn to manage their drink. That's not a good idea. You just really want to delay initiation for as long as possible because you're reducing long-term harm. So if you interact with parents, that's a really good message to be conveying. Don't get sucked into the small amounts early, delaying as long as possible. There's good evidence base now around that's the best way to protect young people from alcohol-related harms. And also interesting is that this exposure effect happens at both product category, so just beer in general, for instance, as well as at individual brand level. So just being exposed, say, to Midori ads over and over again makes people feel good about spirits in general, not just about Midori. So the alcohol industry says to us, look, back off, stop telling us to stop advertising, because all we're doing is competing for market share. We'll keep advertising and the other brand will keep advertising. All we're doing is cannibalizing each other. And actually, they're not. We've got really good evidence that shows that what they're effectively doing is increasing the pie. So the market's getting bigger and bigger because they're pulling more people in who are drinking more. So unfettered alcohol advertising is not a good idea. Having said that, there is complete immersion of alcohol advertising for our young people. They get to see it on TV and all different other venues for advertising. I'll talk more about it in a minute, but we're seeing more and more outdoor advertising happening. Because the TV restrictions are a little bit, people are very aware of that and they get a lot of flack if they advertise on TV. They're now popping it up in all other kinds of places. We're seeing lots during sports broadcasting. They'll talk more about it in a moment. Alcohol merchandising, all kinds of stuff happening on the internet, and product placement. We've done a study looking at music lyrics. You would be amazed at the number of songs in the top 20 that talk about alcohol and drinking alcohol, and some of them are even speaking specifically about particular brands. So again, just complete immersion. Now, in terms of traditional media, we're seeing a little bit of a change in distribution, as we said earlier. So TV is still huge, but it's dropping over time, and we're seeing increased internet, but also outdoor advertising. We're seeing overall high levels of exposure. In the US, they've been doing what they call ecological momentary assessment. So they get cohorts of kids and they give them little gadgets and they have to flag every time they get exposed to an alcohol ad or any kind of alcohol stimuli. Now, that's a little bit tricky because, as we said, a lot of it happens at the subconscious level anyway. So they're not going to be actually registering a lot of it, but the amounts that they're registering are truly scary. Many, many instances every single day, and this was around 12 and 13-year-olds. So it's starting young, the extent to which they're being exposed. There are frequent code violations. So there are these codes out there that tell industry what they can do in terms of alcohol advertising. Those codes are already far too lax, and Julia will talk more about that shortly. But even with those lax codes, there are loads of violations happening all the time. They're just busy disregarding it. And it's a real problem because the they're self-governing their own codes, so they're quite relaxed about the way they deal with it. And they've also, it's time limited. So by the time someone complains about a campaign and it goes through their lengthy processes, the campaign's gone and moved on. So it's a toothless tiger. We tend to find that products that are more heavily promoted to youth are appearing more in youth media. So for instance, if I use an old-fashioned example, so magazines that are targeted at young adults have got more brands of alcohol advertised in them that are consumed primarily by young adults. So the industry will say, oh, look, we're just matching the market's needs with our products. But what they're actually doing is getting younger people to drink more and more of particular kinds of products, and particularly where they're high alcohol content products, that's a real problem. Longitudinal studies are showing that there is definitely a link between exposure and consumption. So we've had a lot of cross-sectional data over the years. So you collect your data at one point in time and say, have you seen alcohol ads a lot? Yes, no, or people would estimate their level of exposure and then they'd compare that to their alcohol consumption. And the industry would always say, no, that's not rigorous enough. That's not evidence because it's happening at one point in time. We've now got really good longitudinal studies that have tracked children over time, and they show that the young kids being exposed most to alcohol are drinking more later on. So the industry's kind of switched its tone, and instead of saying you haven't got longitudinal data, they're now saying you haven't got enough longitudinal data in Australia, and Australian culture is different. So we can't rely on that longitudinal data that's from the UK or the US, which of course is absolute rubbish. And the other thing that we're seeing very recently is that partying themes are becoming really popular in ads. So it's that real social vibe, lots of people, lots of singing and dancing, and lots of alcohol being consumed. And some very recent research is showing that the more you expose kids to that theme in particular, the higher their levels of consumption. Here's a little bit of work we did a few years ago before the partying theme was recognised, looking at what the main kinds of themes are that are in alcohol ads. And it's interesting because the literature has already delved into what's particularly appealing for children. And the most appealing things for children in advertising across different product categories are things like humour, things that show friendship and mateship, and things that have animals in them. So lo and behold, the dominant themes in alcohol advertising include those very things that we know are particularly attractive to children. The message takeout from that huge amount of advertising they're being exposed to is basically that alcohol's all about the 3 F's, kind of fun, friendship, and physical activity. Like it's a really good thing. It enhances all of these different activities, and that it's inexpensive and that you can buy it in bulk. So you may have noticed that a lot of the ads that you're going to be exposed to are all about buying cases or, of beer or of wine products. It's not about buying individual units. And that constant exposure to these messages is about it's so much fun and it's so cheap and you should buy lots of it. That builds up over time. The conscious and subconscious effects are occurring, makes it harder and harder at a population level to try and tell people alcohol is not good for you. You really should be minimising your intake. Looking particularly at sport, because this is a really conscious area at the moment, there seems to be some perceived natural association. You've got these sporty, athletic people and they go with alcohol. And we get a lot of media. You would have seen it around end of season footy antics and sports people getting very drunk. They still get a lot of profile for that and they get slapped over the wrist, but it's still promoting the idea that sport and alcohol go together. And part of that is around the massive amount of advertising that happens during sport. And there's a recognised loophole in the existing codes that says you can't advertise during children's viewing time, which is very, very limited time in the middle of the day, except if it's during sport. Sport's our one big loophole that, hey, that's fine. Because alcohol and sport are so natural together, we can't say you can't advertise alcohol during sport. So we'll allow you to do that. But the problem is a lot of kids watch a lot of sport. So it's a way that they're tapping into the child market too. There have been some recent studies. One of them found that anywhere between 50 and 200 mentions per hour of alcohol through either the visuals or the audio. That's absolutely enormous. That amount of repetition is embedding in people's brains whether they want it to or not. This particular study looked over 12 months of sports broadcasting in Australia, 51 million exposure to alcohol ads. You may not have realised the extent to which every time you watch sport, you are just saturated in alcohol messaging, whether it's around the boards, around the field. They imprint it digitally onto the grass. You would have seen that as well. It's all over the players' uniforms. They promote alcohol during all the ad breaks. You've often got the announcers mentioning alcohol products as well. It's layer upon layer upon layer. If you have any potential in your roles to advocate against alcohol in advertising during sport, that would be good. And like we said before, we've got both that explicit and implicit operational level of assimilation, which means once kids have spent their childhood watching sport and alcohol together, it's impossible to separate those for the rest of their lives. It's a done deal. They've also got some experiments. They don't do it here in Australia, but in the US, for instance, alcohol brands sponsor athletes, particularly college level athletes, and they've been able to track those college athletes over time, and their rate of consumption increases the more that they're sponsored and relative to their unsponsored peers. So just for them, wearing the gear and receiving that money creates this positive feeling about alcohol that results in their increased consumption. And we get a lot of talk now, and I'll show you some in a moment, about how the alcohol industry is doing their bit to try and stop youth harm with alcohol. But when we access, they've done through FOI processes in the UK, and they've gotten into their private documents, it's really explicit that they are targeting children because they're grooming them. They are the consumers today, and they're very much the consumers of tomorrow. So you need to capitalise on them, which is what they do. The Foundation for Alcohol Research and Education, FAIR, has got a big campaign going on at the moment for End Alcohol Advertising in Sport, if you wanted to link in with any other agencies who are working in that field. Digital media, I won't go much into this, but I'm sure you're aware it's endemic. The Thirsty Camel efforts in online, they're so clever. They've got such great little memes and jokes all the way through their websites and their advertising. It's so engaging, it's so shareable. Again, very hard to be up against. The thing with online media too is that it's very, very time sensitive. So they'll start sending out messages at 3 o'clock on Friday afternoon saying, getting ready for your big drinking session tonight. Like, they can be so much more responsive and adaptive than we can in other media. Very high rates of code violation within online media because it's so hard for us to monitor and assess. And the kids are lapping it up. So here are some images about the Little Fat Lamb website. You'll be able to tell me, is this Instagram or is it Facebook? But Facebook, thank you. This isn't the official Fat Lamb website. This is one that people have created themselves. So the company says, can't do anything about this. This is just our fans out there. So it just sits out there on the internet, targeting and engaging with young people and idolizing this whole idea about drinking masses and masses of alcohol and getting as drunk as you possibly can. We mentioned merchandise a few minutes ago as well. It's fascinating. It's part, people have identity work, and the clothes that we wear communicate to the people around us about our core selves. So it seems that when young people don alcohol labelled products, it gets embedded into their self-identity, and lo and behold, they drink more alcohol over time as a result. So we've got longitudinal data looking at this merchandising issue now as well. So you can see from an alcohol company's point of view, handing this stuff out free is a very good strategy because you're increasing consumption amongst the individual who's wearing it, and you're promoting your product to all of their peers. Parents are oblivious. The studies they've done asking parents, are you aware of the effects of merchandise on your children's alcohol consumption? No idea. So if we can kind of encourage parents to see that as an outcome, that would be good. Julia will talk more about the codes, but our suggestions are that they really need to be mandatory. At the moment, they're voluntary and they're run by industry, which is a disaster waiting to happen. They need to address more than what they currently do. They need to address the quantity of alcohol advertising that's out there rather than looking at specific little ads that seem to contravene their code. They need to look at placement where these ads appear, as well as the content of the ad. They should cross all communication channels, not just selective ones that they do. And they should specify what is appropriate rather than trying to list all the things they can't do, because then they can never catch up. So the French model, the La Louis Yvin, that actually does that. It says, if you're going to promote alcohol, here are the only things you can mention and the only ways that you can depict your product. That's much more limiting, and it stops the industry from being so creative and finding ways to get around things. In terms of saturation, I just wanted to put this up as an example. My husband, who likes his drink, even he was outraged. It was 9 o'clock on a weekday when he went to the supermarket to buy some food. Just in that one, like must have been 5-minute episode where he's at the counter, 2 different alcohol products, a spirit and a fuzzy champagne there, popped up to promote to him while the products are being scanned. On the front of the docket had an alcohol ad, and on the back of the docket had an alcohol ad. So just in that tiny window frame of buying non-alcohol products, you can get hit with 4 different alcohol ads. So until you kind of realise that it's there, you don't understand the extent to which this is just all around our kids. And, you could have had a 5-year-old standing next to him while that was being processed and would have been exposed to the visual ads. So our solutions, well, it's easy. You just got to minimise exposure. We just got to tell these guys it's not okay to keep advertising to our kids. And that looks like those mandatory regulations. It means closing that loophole with sport. We just have to advocate as strong as possible to get that out. These silly timeframes that they put up that they call children's viewing time are ridiculous. Most kids are still up way later than that. We've got to make sure that we're covering off on all different kinds of promotion, like the outdoor and internet forms that are now becoming so popular, and product placement that we really have no idea of how much of that is out there. No, I haven't got much longer, have I? Yeah. So I'll just touch briefly on some of the work we've done around levers, because that's probably right onto the injury thing. We've published quite a few studies on that and collected different forms of data to try and drill down to what is it that's going through their heads when they head down south and drink as much as they can. But part of the story has been that the older people that we talk to keep bringing levers up as the trademark problem. So go away, stop talking to us older people. We're in control of our drink. It's those young people. They're just out of control. And you would have seen just recently on the news, they just love showing pictures of drunk young people during levers because they become the scapegoats for our alcohol problems. Through a whole bunch of interview data, what we kept finding, though, was that these levers were talking about the big people in their lives and the examples that they were setting. So don't read all these quotes, but I can send them out to anyone who wants to have a look. But they kept talking about, the dad bought us all this drink. The mum helped us disguise the alcohol in the car seat and in juice bottles because the parents knew that the venues down there would be checking cars, and the parents were helping them disguise the alcohol products to send their little kids off, their kids off with loads of alcohol. And they talked about the fact that drinking this alcohol during levers made them feel grown up. That to them was the significance of maturity. So we go to levers because we're no longer school children, we're now adults, therefore we must drink alcohol. It's just so tied up. So this keeps telling us that really it's the adults that we need to be focusing on. So young people are a problem, sure, but we can't fix them in isolation because they're watching the big people. Now, DrinkWise think they've got this covered, unless you may not be aware, but DrinkWise is actually run by the alcohol industry, but they're supposedly doing the right thing and helping encouraging people to drink less, particularly young people. So they had this campaign that today it was run years and years ago. When we do our focus groups, parents still keep talking about this and what a fabulous campaign it is. Didn't have any effect. Do you recognise this one, the How to Drink Properly campaign, targeted at young people? We interviewed bunches of young people and surveyed them, and they kept saying, oh, love this ad, it's cool and classy, it gets us, it accepts that we're going to get shit-faced, it encouraged me to drink, no one associates with the negative picture in it, we all think we're the cool dude in the ad, it promotes drinking as if it's an alcohol ad, it's encouraging me to drink. DrinkWise won awards for this campaign for it being fantastic, and they keep promoting it as examples of how much they benefit society through their efforts. So we need to sort out the big people. And that includes the adults who are drinking around kids as well as the adults who are running the alcohol companies. And the things we can do are things like putting proper warning labels on alcohol products. So work we've done with the Cancer Council to look at the different kinds of messages that would work, this one was amongst the most effective. So bowel cancer seems to freak people out a bit. And if you tell them that there's actually a nice strong link between alcohol consumption and bowel cancer, it reduces their intentions to drink alcohol. We've also talked to adults around how they depict themselves as a drinker, so they could choose occasional light, social, heavy or binge drinking, as you can see there. 40% chose social, which is by far the biggest proportion out of the 5. And when we looked at those people who called themselves social drinkers, 90% of them were drinking at high risk levels, but only 40% of them recognised the fact that they were drinking at high risk levels. So there are loads of adults out there who think they're safe drinkers and they're absolutely not. And why would so many people equate alcohol with being social? You know, if you think about the ways that the ads depict alcohol consumption, there's always that enormous social theme that somehow we have to put a bit of a lid on. We also ask adults around, these are what are called responsible drinking practices, and we ask them, which ones do you do? This one blew us away. So we asked them, how often do you refuse a drink that you don't want? And only a third of people refuse drinks they don't want. So that's how embedded alcohol is in our culture, and that you just have to keep drinking even if you don't want to. A positive thing to take out of this, teenagers and young adults are really hard to advertise to. As soon as they think that you're targeting them and you're wanting to change them in some way, they rebel and they go the opposite direction. Makes them a really, really tough audience, which is again why we keep coming back to, let's sort out the big people first. So we're really big on, let's have our messages targeted around a lot of the older people, mature age people, and get them to reconsider their drinking and to be saying and modelling the right kind of things. So when a parent walks in at home of an evening and goes, oh my God, I need a drink, I've had a hard day, what's the message that the kids in the household are picking up? Is that alcohol is very important for mood control. So this is a parallel with our wonderful colleagues at Cancer Council. So they do tobacco ads. And over the years, they've tested all kinds of ways of targeting young people and adults. And they came to the conclusion that if you just focus on the adults, because kids are adults in training and they're wanting to learn what adults do, they're watching and they're taking it in, but they're not feeling preached at because the message is obviously going to the adults and not to them. So this is the From Every Quitter campaign that ran recently from Cancer Council. You may have seen it, but again, you're probably not the target audience, so you may not have. But we went to both teenagers and adults and asked them the extent to which they approve of tobacco campaigns in general. And you'll see that the teenagers actually had much higher levels of approval than the adults did, but approval was high across both. We asked them about their awareness of this particular campaign, and it was very similar, the extent to which they'd actually seen this campaign and gotten exposed to it. And in terms of the perceived effectiveness of this ad in getting people to quit smoking, their rate was even just a little bit higher than the adults. So keep that in mind. You don't have to target the kids. You can target the big people. The kids are watching. The kids are getting the message. So take out for you guys, if you get the opportunity to advocate for policy, population level policies, not just the ones targeting kids. So things around warning labels, around advertising restrictions. Don't get sucked into the propaganda from the industry that looks all official with names like DrinkWise and the ABAC code. It's just industry in disguise. Diageo has this smashed project that apparently they're reaching tens of thousands of Australian teenagers through schools. Schools are allowing Diageo, a major alcohol company, in to teach their young people how not to get drunk. It's the most bizarre situation. We need to put a stop to that whenever we can. And send your complaints to the Alcohol Advertising Review Board whenever you see an ad that you think isn't right, because it shouldn't be there because kids can see it, or it's promoting an unhealthy message about alcohol. Log a complaint, log a complaint. The more complaints that we can amass and that show to policymakers, the more chance we have of getting some changes made. I think I've gone over time, but thank you very much.
Does anyone have any questions for Simone?
Yes, I do. In relation to the codes, how often are they reviewed, and what's the appetite for changing them and strengthening them so they're not so weak?
Now, I probably will that's Julia's absolute forte, so I'll probably let her go with that. The ABAC code did get reviewed just recently in a very weak attempt to try and cover more of the internet stuff, but it was just talk and not much action. So it needs a lot more. We really want government to take over the code and run it rather than industry running the code. They're not sounding anywhere near ready for that message yet.
Are you doing anything around advocating for the access? You talked about access at the start, because I live in my local shopping centre. There's 4 bottle shops, and I'm not even a big shopping centre, but there's 4 bottle shops, and I think it's just so easy for licensed premises just to get a liquor licence. And as I work for local government, we push back, and that just gets approved quite easily.
Yeah, we do a little bit of work in that space, but it is a hard one. The National Drug Research Institute does a whole lot more in that area. They're also based at Curtin. But I think one of the biggest concerning things that we're seeing in WA is similar to, for those of you who've gone to bottle shops or supermarkets in the eastern states, you know that a lot of the time over there, they're adjacent, they're directly together, so that as you take your kids into the supermarket, they're getting an eyeful of alcohol promotion. And it looks more and more like that's starting to happen in WA as well. So the more we can resist that and prevent it from being co-located with our grocery items, that would be great. Yeah, unfortunately, yeah, it's probably going more the other way. Thank you, everyone.
So I think that provided a nice setting the scene of what the consumption levels are here in WA and just reinforces the power of advertisements and some nice tangible things that we can do as individuals and as organisations to help reduce the effect that they're having in WA. So moving on, now we have Julia Stafford. So Julia is a research fellow with the alcohol programs team at the Public Health Advocacy Institute of WA, which is also at Curtin University. And Julia's work combines research and applying public health advocacy strategies to reduce harm from alcohol. Julia is a member of the Executive Committee of the National Alliance for Action on Alcohol and co-convenes the Alcohol, Tobacco and Other Drugs Special Interest Groups at the Public Health Association of Australia. Thanks, Julia.
Excellent.
I will do my best not to duplicate what Simone has said. There may be some things that touch on similar areas from slightly different angles. So I'm here to talk about from the policy perspective, and it's hard to separate the research and the policy because from a public health point of view, they're so interlinked. So hopefully this will follow nicely from what Simone has presented. So the World Health Organization has identified the 3 best buys for reducing harm from alcohol. They've framed that in terms of tackling non-communicable diseases, but they apply equally for around injury and the short-term harms from alcohol. So these are the 3 best buys that are the most cost-effective means of reducing harm from alcohol. And you hear these all the time, and Simone presented these in a different way, because these 3 areas really drive and guide the work of organisations working in this space. So the best buys are marketing restrictions, alcohol pricing policies, particularly around tax, and reducing the physical availability of alcohol. There are other complementary policy approaches that are also recommended by the World Health Organization and other health authorities that would complement action in those best buy areas. So around public education, minimum pricing of alcohol, and approaches around alcohol labelling. So groups working in this space also often talk about the need for a comprehensive approach. We don't just want action in one of these areas, they really work well together. And so while sometimes we need to prioritise action to try and achieve progress in one of those particular areas, it's always in the framework of a comprehensive approach. So who is responsible for these policy areas, or who should be responsible for them? So if we look at the federal government, action on tax really sits with them. You can't deal with tax at a state level. Marketing controls, while all levels of government have some role to play potentially in marketing controls, really, if you want to address it comprehensively, you need the federal government involved. And they often have a role in funding treatment and support services. If you look at the state level, liquor licensing laws sit at the state and territory level. So when you're trying to address availability, and your question went to that, largely there's a role for the state government in that. we're seeing more and more a role for state governments in marketing controls, particularly given we haven't seen a lot of progress from the federal government in there. And we'll talk a bit about that in a minute. So state governments often have control of advertising around public transport. And so you see in most jurisdictions there's some action towards reducing the state government's properties role in marketing alcohol. States and territories can do minimum pricing for alcohol. We've seen that with the Northern Territory recently adopting a minimum price. They often control school education, so if you want to get good alcohol education in schools, that's a state level issue. They also have a role in funding treatment and support services. Local governments have been more of a focus recently in terms of their role in addressing alcohol advertising, particularly on bus stops, and potentially other local government property, because often the contracts sit at the local government level. There's also important roles in liquor licensing, and local governments have a particular role within the Liquor Control Act, but all sorts of challenges as well, and we'll talk about that. I think an area important for us in the room and by webinar is the role for NGOs, for academics, and for the community in these areas. We all have a really important role in advocating for effective policy change. We need to build the evidence base where there are gaps. We need to communicate that evidence base and evaluate policy changes. We often have important partnership roles in delivering some of these policy areas. And we have a really important role of being a critical friend of government. So praising where there are where there's good progress, and criticising when they're not doing enough or they're doing things in inappropriate areas. So an important role in sharing information with governments, in building trust, and holding governments accountable for inaction. Now, wouldn't it be nice if we lived in a world where the policy process looked a bit like this? It's quite simple, where you identified a problem, you found an evidence-based solution for that, you implemented it, and you evaluated it. I would like to live in that world. And in that world, there would be unicorns, money would grow on trees, you could eat as much chocolate as you wanted, and you could go on as many holidays. So we don't live in that world, unfortunately, maybe one day. In reality, the policy process probably looks a bit more like this. You do have to know what you want and find the problem that needs addressing, but it's not a linear process. There are so many other factors that come into play. So public opinion around policy, the political context, the social context, economic context. You see that all the time through the newspapers. Opposition from vested interests is a really important factor in the work that we do. It's all about timing. It's about the personal experiences of the policymakers. It's about the availability of the evidence, but also really importantly, how that evidence is used. And I see this part as a bit of a black box. A lot of the policy process is hidden from public view. We don't really know what happens. We have to make educated guesses about the best approaches. The most effective policy approaches are not always and not often the ones that succeed. So we need to prioritise those our policy options, but we need to be really flexible and open to windows of opportunity and to be opportunistic because of all those other factors that interact in this policy process. So moving on to alcohol marketing policy. Following from Simone, we really need to move from the current system of largely industry self-regulation towards independent controls on all forms of marketing. And they should particularly seek to protect young people. That sounds obvious to us, but we're really far away from that kind of policy ideal at the moment. We've got this collection of codes that can be described as self-regulation. They might describe themselves as quasi-regulation or co-regulation, because sometimes there is some role of government in these codes, but their core features are that they're largely or completely industry developed run codes, and have heavy involvement of industry but very limited role for government, and almost no role in outside stakeholders. So they really heavily prioritise private interests over the public interest. So there's while ABAC is the central alcohol marketing code, there's a whole collection of codes that are relevant in this area, and they all kind of work together. And so we basically need a complete overhaul of that system. It doesn't work fundamentally. It was never designed to protect young people. It was really designed to protect the industry. There was also a question about a review of the codes, and what we've seen time and time again is that they are internally reviewed by the industry bodies that designed and run them. If there have been public consultations, they're extremely limited, and there's no transparency. They're not run by government departments, so there's no access to the information. They don't put the submissions online. There's no way of knowing how they've got to a decision. And it's very much hidden from view and not based on the evidence. So the ABAC code a year ago put in place some new placement rules, which the industry bodies developed themselves, and so they magically appeared one day. So they've been in place for a year now, and the ABAC have said that they're going to review them. So we've asked them, what does that look like? Is that going to be a public process? And basically they've said no. And of course, we knew that was going to be the case, but they designed these rules, they've put them in place, they've shown to be useless, completely useless, and then they'll review them, to their own standards, and they'll say that they're fine. So, we're a far cry from where we need to be, really. Self-regulation is really like asking a fox to guard the hen house. The companies that are spending hundreds of millions of dollars a year are currently in charge of regulating their own advertising, and there are so many deficiencies that I won't go over because Simone's largely covered that. So very clear from a public health perspective that self-regulation has failed, and that we need a new approach to protect young people. So what's our role in trying to move the policy from where we are currently to where we want to be? So there's an important role for research, developing the research and using the research. So we need to build that evidence base, and we need to do that continually. There's always a need for current, recent evidence. We can't always be looking back to, even if there was a wonderful study done in 2005, there comes a point where it gets a bit dated, and the situation has changed. So there is always a role for new research, but we don't need to wait for the perfect evidence base to really go hard in our advocacy, because we have enough. We absolutely have enough to show that the current system has failed, and that an independent approach would be much, much better. So continually building the evidence base is really helpful for finding new things to say about the issue, in trying to get media or new excuses to make contact with policymakers, and to show that there's something new to say. And we can tailor that research to who the target is. So if you're trying to target a local government to make some change around alcohol marketing, then you want some local evidence. So you might want to look at what we can do to localise the evidence to show that there's a problem that decision maker can have a role in addressing. The research might be market research, so gauging public opinion on these issues. We do that fairly often at the WA state level and nationally, because it can be really helpful to show policymakers that 80% of the public is supportive of taking ads off buses or something like that. So really we want policy relevant evidence. And so there's some really practical areas. So we, as example, just recently had published, our team reviewed the first 6 months of those ABAC's new placement rules, because we knew that the rules looked awful, but let's use a more academic approach to show it through a peer-reviewed process, not just because we say it, but it's gone through peer review, that the placement rules were useless, that almost 100% of complaints were dismissed, and clearly it was achieving nothing in protecting young people. So we also have a role in working through the media. And when I say we, I mean the collective we, not just our team. Groups often use the media to draw draw attention to examples of terrible ads. This is a few years ago now, but there was a situation where a school in the Perth area had a phone box outside of it, and over 18 months or so, there were 4 different alcohol ads placed immediately outside the school gate. So the industry really wasn't learning its lesson, and every time we got really strong media coverage of that to show that this is an issue now and this is what the issue looks like, that school kids are walking past this every day. We wouldn't have known this, but we found out about this because the deputy principal of the school thought this wasn't right and made contact with us, and we had that relationship. So every time there was a new ad, we could act quickly on that. And you really do need to act quickly. When you see an example of a terrible ad, either yourself or through us, we really do need to act quickly to get the media attention. You need to do it while the ad's up, and while you want ultimately to take the ad down. There's no media value in the ad not being there anymore. So acting quickly and being the eyes and ears in the community for these terrible ads can really, really help. This is a few other examples. Some of you might have seen this. Again, from a community member who contacted us, seeing a Captain Morgan Spirits ad with the tagline, "Party like it's payday," outside of a Centrelink office in Perth. That was just gold. You can't orchestrate something like that. So we could get some good media coverage to draw attention to just how much the current ads were failing, because that was perfectly acceptable under the current codes. That Beers by the Busload, that was a school bus. Again, doesn't break any rules. This is how bad the rules are. A Dan Murphy's ad at a school gate. And they're all examples that we wouldn't have known about if a community member hadn't contacted us. Simone mentioned the End Alcohol Advertising in Sport campaign. This is a really new, and we haven't really had this before in the alcohol marketing advocacy space. A really well-planned, public-facing campaign that's run by FAIR, but has a whole bunch of supporting organisations who are actively involved, including FAWA, where they're really investing in social media campaigns, a lot through digital media, to build their database of supporters, which has really grown massively recently. So you can get that, you get enough community members who are concerned about this, and then there's this whole group of people that you can mobilise to make contact with their local member of parliament, and do all these different things. Spread the message widely in the community that we need to remove alcohol advertising from sport. So jump on their website and sign up as a supporter, and you can be part of that ride. And there's a lot of exciting things planned with this campaign. And it's going to have a really strong focus on removing that exemption in the TV code that allows alcohol ads during sport in kids' viewing times on the weekend. So I encourage you to be part of that journey. Simone also mentioned the Alcohol Advertising Review Board that our team runs in partnership with Cancer Council. So we accept complaints from the community, and we really rely on those. We've had over 1,000 complaints since we started the review board, and in all but 1 year, we've received far more complaints than the industry's self-regulatory codes, because people have completely lost faith in the industry's code. So we get far more complaints, and we really need those complaints to highlight those examples of terrible ads. They go through a review process. We have over 100 panel members from around Australia who, when you send a complaint, we send it to our panel members. 3 panel members review each complaint, come to a determination against our code, and then we publicise that determination. So it's about naming and shaming irresponsible advertisers and drawing attention to the need for independent regulation of alcohol marketing. So through the review board, we publish reports occasionally. So our latest major report was about why alcohol must leave sport. And Nick Marvin, the former manager, CEO of the Wildcats and chairman of the National Basketball League, wrote the foreword for the report. So when we release those reports, we send it to decision makers, ministers at state and national levels, to really draw attention to that issue. The report before that, so in 2016, we released a report about the case for removing alcohol ads from public transport. So for both of those reports, we looked at our massive database of complaints, and so can take from that, draw from that the information about what the community is concerned about, the volume of complaints we're receiving about these particular areas. Because when we looked at our big complaints database, about 1/3 of the complaints related to sport themes, so sponsorship or an ad during sport on TV. So there was clearly a big concern about alcohol in sport. There's also really clear concern about advertising on public transport. And this report proved very timely, because not long after that, the Labor, just before the state election, the Labor Party committed to removing alcohol ads from public transport, and they cited our report and evidence as part of their rationale for doing that. Similar thing happened in South Australia. So they were going through a review of their Liquor Act, and our report came out at a good time, that there was this opportunity for them to commit to removing alcohol ads from public transport. This, unfortunately, has been limited to bus ads and around train stations. So we were hoping to get bus stops in there as well, but we've certainly tried over a long period of time, but bus stop advertising has come to be a responsibility of local governments. We had hoped that the state government would deal with it so that each local government didn't have to do it individually, but but that's not how it's played out. So now we are clear that bus stop alcohol advertising is the responsibility of local governments, and local governments often have contracts with an outdoor advertising company, and so our team and others are now seeking to work with local governments to try and get them in a really good place to be able to negotiate alcohol advertising out of their contracts for their bus stop advertising. It's not an easy process, but I mean, I'm really encouraged that we're going to get there. And I think as soon as we get the first one over the line, I think a lot more will follow. And so if that's an area that's of interest to you, then feel free to get in contact with us. So just to reiterate Simone's point about what you can do, please feel free to make a complaint to the Alcohol Ad Review Board. It's super easy. Send us an email with a picture, or call us, or on our website there's an online complaint form. It is super easy. And with smartphones, you know, you can always take a pic of even an online ad that's only there briefly. I'm probably taking way too much time. But I wanted to talk about alcohol and price. So lots of evidence. It's very clear that as the price of alcohol increases, the amount of drinking decreases across the population. So there is so much evidence to back this up that it's the #1 best buy from the World Health Organization. And we know that reducing drinking reduces the risks of alcohol harms to the individual and collectively across the population. There are really two main areas of pricing policies. There's tax and there's minimum price. So just briefly on tax, as I said, it's something that only the federal government can address. You know, states and territories just can't deal with tax issues. So we have a very messy tax system for alcohol in Australia. There are about 16 different rates of tax that apply to different alcohol products. The biggest anomaly is the way wine is taxed. It's taxed based on its price. So the cheaper the price of the product, the less tax it pays. That's why cheap wine is so cheap. It's because it's not taxed very much. Whereas other forms of alcohol are taxed more in accordance to their alcohol volume, but there are so many different rates within that. We don't have a straightforward volumetric tax approach. So the #1 issue with, or priority with tax is getting wine to be taxed volumetrically. Take away the current wine equalisation tax, which is so many government reviews have identified as, you know, not being well suited to reducing harm from alcohol. It makes no sense. Everybody kind of agrees on that. Even the industry agrees, but it's just been very hard to get a commitment to actually changing it. And a tax would change the price of all alcohol, so it applies across alcohol products. And depending what the tax level is, then that depends on what the actual implications for product prices are. A complementary approach is minimum pricing, and we definitely see these as complementary, not as either or. We want both, and most health groups want action in both of these areas. And the reason why minimum pricing is much more of a topical issue now is that it's something that states and territories can do. So in the absence of federal government motivation to deal with alcohol tax, we're now looking to state and territories to see what they can do. And now we're very clear that they can do minimum pricing. So that sets a floor price per standard drink below which a retailer couldn't sell an alcohol product. We see it as very complementary to tax. Because with tax, a retailer could still heavily discount a product. They could absorb the tax. Like we see it all the time, like loss-leading products in supermarkets, you know, absurdly cheap prices. They can do that because the retailer's absorbing that tax. Whereas a minimum price they can't sell it below a certain price. So it really tackles that heavy discounting, the really cheap products that to prevent the big retailers using loss-leading tactics. And so, so much potential. It's not a tax, so any revenue from a minimum price would stay with industry. Whereas with tax, government collects that money. It could go into prevention services or general government revenue. So they act quite differently, but are very complementary. So probably covered that. So there's quite a bit of research available about how minimum pricing reduces harm. Some of you might have been at the seminar with Dr. John Holmes in the last couple of weeks. He came over to visit us, and he's one of the world's leading experts on minimum pricing. And so he was talking about how well targeted a minimum price is at reducing harm amongst the heaviest drinkers while having very little impact on moderate drinkers. So while has population benefits, it's a policy that's really quite targeted, and that's because the heaviest drinkers tend to buy the cheapest alcohol products, and they buy so much more of the alcohol products than moderate or light drinkers. And that's why a minimum price is really targeted towards reducing the drinking and the harms of the heaviest drinkers. We know that through real-world studies. So Canada's had various forms of minimum pricing for a few decades. So there's been a lot of real-world evaluation of how minimum pricing works there. There's also really important modelling studies, and that's what Dr. John Holmes from the University of Sheffield has been involved in. They've got this modelling program, extremely comprehensive, and I wouldn't even pretend to understand it for a second, but it has really shown how a minimum price would affect a local situation, so they can plug in details from the different countries and regions to see how minimum pricing would affect there. And there's a whole bunch of published research on that. There's not research specifically about how minimum pricing would affect young people's drinking. I think we'll see that in the future. We don't have specific evidence about young people and minimum pricing yet, but we do know that young people are particularly sensitive to the price of alcohol. We know price is a significant factor in young people's purchasing decisions around alcohol, and that young risky drinkers tend to pay less per standard drink. So there is good evidence to suggest that a minimum price would support efforts to reduce consumption and harms among the risky drinking young people. The reason that we as a group and as networks have been talking about minimum pricing more recently is that WA's Health Minister expressed a public interest in minimum pricing and has encouraged active community discussion on minimum pricing as a policy option for Western Australia. So there's no commitment there yet, but when the Minister encourages community discussion, then groups like us have really important roles to play in informing that discussion and keeping that discussion going in useful directions. So we've started that process now, and so we all have roles to play in contributing to maintaining an active and informed community discussion. So as part of that, our team, in collaboration with the WA Alcohol and Youth Action Coalition supporting organisations, have released a report. Some of you may have seen this, you might have a copy. If you don't, jump on our website and download a copy. If you want a hard copy, let me know. And so that really brings together all the available evidence around the effectiveness of a minimum price, but puts it in a Western Australian context. So, talks about the existing levels of harm, how cheap alcohol is in WA, and has these quotes and statements from a whole bunch of different agencies, some of whom would be in the room, who support a minimum price for alcohol in WA and why they support it. So there's 3 pages of those quotes, which I think is a really powerful part of this report. We also have, and I think I have it it's on the next slide, have a graph that, if you can make sense of it quickly. So say we had $1.25 minimum price per standard drink. This graph is intended to demonstrate it's really only the cheapest products that would increase in price under a minimum unit price. So most products on the market, and that includes most, if not all, of the heavily advertised products, are already above that minimum price. So what the products that most people buy would not be affected by a minimum price policy. It's really only the cheapest products, mainly wine products, that would change, and they're the products that are favoured by the heaviest drinkers. We commissioned some market research to gauge public opinion on minimum pricing in WA and showed really encouraging levels of support, and that support was actually highest among the lower income respondents to the survey. So the full details of that are in the report. There's also, as I said, in encouraging community discussion on minimum pricing, there's a really important role for engaging with the media. And we can all do that in our own ways, as individuals and through our organisations. I mean, the Mandurah, if you look at Mandurah, there's a journalist at the Mandurah Mail who has really taken this on and has published a whole series of stories trying to find a local angle to minimum pricing. And I found that super interesting, and no doubt not all of it I will agree with, because she's getting a whole range of different views, but I think that is so important and to be encouraged. So letters to the editor, calling in to Talkback Radio. I've done a whole bunch of radio interviews where they've had Talkback, and great range of opinions. And it's so great when someone who's informed jumps on the phone to really support the messages. That's been so important and is not that difficult to do. Have I completely run out of time?
2 minutes.
Just quickly on availability. I don't have that much to say about this anyway. So, I mean, it's so important, but it's a very complex area in itself. So when we talk about availability, we're really talking about the trading hours of licensed premises, talking about outlet density, about young people's underage access to alcohol, and about liquor licensing decisions, including, really importantly, community representation in liquor licensing processes. Packaged liquor has become a really important focus for us and many other groups because the situation has changed massively. In a few decades ago, you used to drink at the pub or at a restaurant, and that was they were the main suppliers of alcohol. It's completely flipped around. Now 80% of alcohol sold in Australia is sold in the form of packaged liquor. So now bottle shops are king, and so off-premise takeaway alcohol is contributing massively to alcohol consumption and therefore alcohol harms. That's important because it means that the major players in alcohol supply have completely changed. Now it's Coles and Woolworths, mainly Woolworths. Dan Murphy's, $1 in $3 Australians spend on alcohol, they spend at Dan Murphy's. It is massive. and they're all about discounts, all about bulk buys. Some of the reasons that packaged liquor particularly concerns us, in addition to the fact that it's where most alcohol is supplied, is the fact that consumption and therefore harms are often hidden. They're hidden in homes, domestic violence, and harms that develop over time that are not so much connected, that are quite disconnected from the actual time of consumption. So your cancers, your liver disease, cardiovascular disease, those things are quite hidden from view. So while liquor retailers can talk all day and night about how responsible they are in their supply of alcohol, well, really, they're contributing to all of these harms that we're not going to see for decades, and that are often hidden from view. So you can responsibly supply alcohol. You're not selling to drunk people or to kids, but is it responsible when massive amounts of harms are going to come from that immediately, hidden from view, and over the long term? So I think packaged liquor retailers have really flown under the radar for a long time, and need a lot more attention from a policy and community concern point of view. There are a number of really good reports on availability issues. This is one of them, a collaboration between FARE and the Institute of Alcohol Studies in the UK, looking at different policy options. And I mean, this came out at a time, it's quite recent, it was May last year, and it's come out at a time when I think the discussion around availability in WA and in other jurisdictions is really interesting. We often hear about the need for a more European drinking culture, more liberalised liquor laws, more relaxed, cafe style, small bar type drinking culture, and those kinds of phrases and what they really mean often goes against the well-established literature on the harms from alcohol availability. Trading hours, there's not so much been a discussion in WA, but massive issue in Queensland and New South Wales, where they've really put in place some changes to the trading hours of nighttime entertainment districts, and important reductions in assaults and other harms. In Western Australia, you might have heard that there's fairly recently been changes to our Liquor Act. For us, this was a really mixed bag in terms of public health. We were overall quite neutral about it. There were some positive aspects to these changes. They will enable, and we don't quite know what it looks like yet because the regulations are still being determined, but some approach to managing the number of packaged liquor outlets, particularly the big outlets, and how close together they can be. So that's interesting. It really depends. We don't know a lot about exactly where outlet density, where the boundaries are of harms and things. So it'll be interesting to monitor and could make some important contributions. There were some provisions around sly grogging, reducing sly grogging in regional areas, and there will be regulations that go some way to helping to control young people's access to online purchasing of alcohol, so how alcohol is delivered to the home. Massive issues around barriers to community representation in liquor licensing. If that's of particular interest to you, feel free to get in touch with us, because that's been an area that we've done quite a lot of work on as probably one of the main NGOs that have been involved in liquor licensing issues over a long period of time. The issue around community representation is something that we're really interested in and still need to go a long way to addressing how that works. So if you have experiences or interests in that, feel free to get in touch with us to discuss that further. I might leave it there given I've run out of time. So thank you all for bearing with me.
Thanks, Julie. We might leave the questions until the end as well, just as we're running a bit short on time. But thanks for clarifying the complexity of what our policy systems are here in WA and the different tangible things that we can do working with Julia and her team to just try and make a change to all these bodies who have a role in alcohol legislation in WA. Where are we going? Cool. So we have Kelly Wilson here. Kelly's the team leader of community safety at the City of Mandurah. She has a Bachelor of Community Development from Murdoch University, but she's worked in a whole different variety of areas since getting that Bachelor. So she's worked in the disability service, the health sector, and also in family services. But today she's going to talk about some of the work that she's done with the City of Mandurah around alcohol, just to give a real tangible focus of what people are doing out in the community. So thanks.
Thank you. So I'm just really going to talk about some of the local initiatives that we're doing at the City of Mandurah and moving forward as well, what we're planning to do next year. So firstly, these are some of the current programs that we have, which I'll be discussing today. Firstly, I just really want to touch on our liquor accord. We have a really strong proactive liquor accord in Mandurah. It's made up of licensed premises, so your bottle shops, your bars, nightclubs, also WA Police, including LAU and local policing. We also have security, taxis and street chaplains that also attend. It's really quite active. We have about 30 to 40 people that attend each meeting. And the real focus is on reducing antisocial behaviour, reducing alcohol-related harms and violence, and also increasing responsible service of alcohol. So we've done 2 strategic planning processes. The last one was done in last year in 2017. And what this allows to do is, keep everyone on the same page so that the whole Accord members are working together to achieve a common ground. It's also ensured resources, time has been effective and really has helped with those decision-making processes as well. It's also about promoting those messages. So we want to reduce alcohol harms, and we also want to promote Mandurah as a positive, vibrant place to come and visit, not just for locals, but also visitors. So there has been 2 initiatives that have come out of the Liquor Accord. These are 2 of our main ones. So in 2012, we introduced a nighttime taxi rate guard at the bottom of our Smart Street Mall, which is where our nightclub and some of our pubs are located. Before that, we had a lot of antisocial behaviour, a lot of assaults occurring. So the group decided to, put a guard in, and this is the payment of the guard is not just the City of Mandurah are paying for this; everyone is contributing to this guard. We also put in CCTV, better lighting, and a drink fountain right near the taxi rank. Since that implementation, we did a review last year, and assaults decreased by, I think, 33%, and fare invasion also decreased by 50%. So it had some really great results. Also, we've just a new project that our Accord is working on is the Be Smart project. SMART stands for Smarter Mandurah, Anti-Violence, Respect, Togetherness. So this is something that the Accord is leading. It's not a City of Mandurah project, and it's about licensed premises coming together to promote some really good positive messages out there in the community. Sometimes Mandurah gets a bit of negative media coverage. Generally, if there's a fight in the Smart Street Mall, it generally makes the Channel 7 or Channel 9 news. So we're trying to combat that and trying to promote positive messages within the community. And I'm just going to show you a little 1-minute video of this. And this is going to be promoted. It's not coming up.
Respect. We're smart at the 10. 95 as well.
We're smart at Murphy. We're smart at Brighton. We're smart at Monkey.
We're smart at North.
Enjoy the great hospitality in Mandurah. We're all here together to give you a great night out. Be smart.
Hey Mandurah, let's be smart.
So this is a campaign that's just being launched at the moment over the summer, and it's in the early stages, but we're hoping to get some more funding to be able to do some signage and more social media posts and more exposure, some radio advertising as well for that project. One of our other programs that we're focused on is our Mandurah Community Youth Alcohol Strategy. So the strategy came about in 2013 because the 2013 National Survey of Year 8 students found that 59% of students were consuming alcohol compared to the Australian average, which was, I think, about 46%. So, and also 33% of those people consuming alcohol was given to them by their parents. So we thought, all right, we need to really do something around this to try and combat the alcohol consumption. So we produced this strategy. So it was really a focus on people from 12 to 24 years. And the main priorities were, educating parents around the effects of alcohol on youth. So it's that brain development, and I think Simone touched on that earlier on. Increased knowledge and awareness about the penalties and the secondary supply laws, and also promotion of harm reduction and community safety messaging. So how we did this was, firstly, we developed a community service directory, and this was distributed among schools, community groups, parents, wherever we could get it out there, and it's also online as well. Secondly, with partnership with the Alcohol and Drug Foundation, we're promoting sporting clubs to become good sports clubs in the area. We currently have 26. So since the implementation of this strategy, this has increased by 40%, and it's that partnership with the Alcohol and Drug Foundation. And also, it's ensuring that sporting clubs have comprehensive alcohol management policies within their clubs. Also, we've had some education for parents around taking drugs and alcohol, talking about drugs and alcohol with their children, and this is run by Sidira. So they've one of our partners in this strategy, so they've done all those parenting workshops. And we also have several alcohol displays that have been available in Mandurah, so at medical practices, a lot in schools. We've also community facilities and events, and those displays have information about the effects on young people, also information for parents about the supply laws and how to get help, so how to get support. Another thing that we did was that we had our health team at the city go out and audit. They did 95 out of 110 licensed premises, and they audited them for responsible service alcohol signage. And 55 of the 95 actually had really good signage. And out of those 55, out of those other 40 people, 58% wanted us to go out and provide signage. So we're actually in the process of doing that re-auditing and to find out if there has been an increase in signage. Also just really want to acknowledge our partners in this strategy. So Palmerston, WA Police, Sidira, and also South Metro Health Service have been played a huge role in all our achievements so far, and this also resulted in us receiving the 2018 Children's Environmental Health and Local Government Policy Awards. And it was quite fitting that our local MP, which is Minister David Templeman, was there to present the award to us. All right, going on to communities that care. So communities that care came when we were developing the youth alcohol strategy. We actually developed a really strong relationship with Deakin University, who oversees the Communities That Care program. In 2016, Mandurah became a pilot site in WA. I think previously Bunbury has touched on the program but never went through the whole process, and I think Kalgoorlie are in their early stages. So Mandurah is really the only one in WA that is in the implementation stage of the Communities That Care project. We have a big uptake in Victoria for Communities That Care. So the model is considered a good fit to guide prevention-based efforts in the Mandurah community, and they had some really great success with reducing alcohol consumption. So that's why we thought we'll start piloting this model. What we did was we did a whole range of surveys in schools with students, and also developed a community profile. And from that profile and the surveys, we were able to identify the risk factors for young people in Mandurah. And those risk factors were favourable attitudes towards alcohol and other drugs, community laws and norms favourable towards alcohol and other drugs, also low commitment to school and poor family management. So now we have a Communities That Care board who is made up of local community members and organisations, and the aim of that board is to implement evidence-based programs to try and reduce these risk factors. So one of these evidence-based programs that we've been carrying out in Mandurah is the Smart Generation program. So Smart Generation comes under, was developed by Deakin University, and it's about ensuring we have a smarter generation and in trying to encourage the reduction of alcohol. There is actually two components. So the first is the supply monitoring. So that's monitoring all liquor outlets with their supply to young people, and also the social marketing, which is educating children and parents and communities about the harms associated with adolescent consumption, and also building relationships to develop, to have those discussions in the home about setting ground rules around delaying alcohol. So the supply monitoring, as I've already said, it was about to investigate alcohol sales. It's also, informing liquor outlets of their practices, and also supporting liquor outlets to improve their practices. And also there's a community awareness and support as well as a part of this process. So what the process involved in having a confederate who's actually 18, so we're not trying to trick licensed premises, we're not go find them if they do serve alcohol. It's more about a community awareness approach. So this person is 18, but they have a real youthful appearance. So they have to, how they are chosen is through our youth team. So our youth team are only given a photo of the person, but no other information, and they have to estimate their age. And the person with the lowest rank of age became our confederate. Then that confederate is trained on what they need to do and say and observe while they go to each liquor licence place, and they are encouraged to purchase alcohol, such as that Fat Lamb that Simone was talking about, that young people will purchase. We don't want them to go and buy a bottle of port. So we encourage that, and we also give them cash. So because the fidelity of the program shows that most likely young people would be buying alcohol through with cash. Then the young person goes to confederate goes into the bottle shop, and they just go grab the alcohol and take it to the counter. The person then will, if they don't ask them for ID, they just purchase the alcohol and leave. If a person does ask them for ID, they say, oh, I don't have any on me at the moment. Then we're hoping that the person behind the counter says, oh, sorry, I can't serve you alcohol. If the person says, oh, all right, you can just take it this time, they still purchase the alcohol. Then after that process, during when the Confederate is going into the store, we're actually looking for if there is clear signage. We're also seeing if there's security and the demographics of the people that are selling the alcohol. This is just some relevant information that we collect as a part of that process. And then after the process, we write to all the liquor stores, informing them of the outcome. And we also do a big social media and newspaper article about the process that we've undertaken. So how did we do? Oh, sorry. So we first did this in 2013, and back then we had 8 bottle shops, and 7 out of the 8 bottle shops served. We then repeated it last year, and we had 18 bottle shops, and 2 out of the 18 served. Then we repeated the process 2 months later in November, and 0 bottle shops served alcohol because they received the letters. They must have did some staff training, and they actually, the 2 bottle shops that did serve contacted us and was really concerned about that process, and we went out there and supported them around signage and that type of thing. And then this year we did it again, and we did have a little increase, but our Confederate was really tall, so we didn't realise that when we chose and looked at the photos. So I don't know if that had a impact, but 3 bottle shops served. But this is still the best results in Australia, and in Victoria, when they conduct these monitoring, it's generally about 50 to 60% serve alcohol. I think WA is really leading in the way with the Mental Health Commission's Alcohol Think Again campaign, also the ID25 campaign. That has a huge effect, and the supply laws as well. So the other component is the social media component. So this is delivered in schools, and it's a multi-strategy approach. So it's trying to tackle it from different angles. So last year we actually delivered it to year 8s and 10s, and our community board said, no, this is a preventative model. We should be actually getting in at an earlier age. So now this year we actually delivered it to year 6 students, which was really a great process to go through. With the class discussions, we deliver 2 lessons, and we do a whole range of the different things. We do, some role play scenarios, brainstorming, and we also get them to find ways to say no, or alternative activities that they can engage in outside of drinking alcohol. Then while that process is happening, we are also sending stuff home through the school newsletter, through brochures, and also their social media at the school to the parents. So the kids are coming home talking about it, and then the parents are receiving this information. And then what we hope is going to be achieved, that they have those conversations, and that rule setting process down the bottom comes into play. So that's what we're really hoping. And then after we deliver the project, we actually get the students to create a poster about what they have learnt. And I just wanted to show some of the snippets from the poster. I think the one on the end is my favourite, saying drinking isn't cool, makes you act like a fool. I want to be successful and have a good life, so no drinking for me, especially under 18. So they come up with all this amazing stuff. And it really demonstrates that they have learnt what they have learnt throughout that process, and really taken on board. Just lastly, City of Mandurah is a local drug action team. So in 2017, we received $10,000 to establish the action team, and it's made up of the people that are involved in our youth alcohol strategy, and also our communities that care board. So this year we received another $25,000, and we're going to be further delivering that Smart Generation program in schools, and also doing that supply monitoring going into 2019. We're also a part of the Communities That Care action plan. We're trying to combat youth alcohol by establishing a youth-led alcohol campaign. So we really want our young people. We're going to do a lot of consultation in our community with our young people to develop the campaign. So we will get them to come up with a branding and logo. We're also, although there is a focus on the young people, we're also going to be focusing on, I think Simone said, the bigger people, so the parents, and we're partnership. We've got a partnership with Mental Health Commission, and they've just released a new campaign saying, I need you to say no. So we're actually going localise that campaign. So I think with the photos and that, we'll have local youth in those campaigns, and that will be aimed at parents. And then we'll also be promoting it through various different means. So I try to reach a whole range of different people, parents and young people, and the community. We'll also be developing a video for young people and hosting a forum next year. So that's our plans moving forward. And that's pretty much it for me. So.
Any questions before we?
Yep.
Yeah, the target is year 6 students, so 11, 12-year-olds.
Yep.
And that came seen as the right age going.
Yeah, and it works really well. They have a lot of knowledge about alcohol already. The things that they know about, my dad drinks, my dad makes me get him alcohol, or my mum asks me for me to get you a bottle of wine, or they know so much about alcohol already. So by the time they're going into year 8 and year 10, they're already, some of them are already drinking. So it's more, and Communities That Care is a really long-term, it's a long-term model, and it's a real preventative. So it's trying to stop it at that really early age. That's why the Communities That Care model are focused from 0 to 18. So it's really about that early intervention, which is a key role. So that's why we decided to do some education in year 6. And in year high school, there is a lot of education already. And in primary school, there's not, so that's where we thought would be the best avenue, to touch on, and also hopefully, families to start talking about that at an earlier stage. So, yeah, that's it.
Just on that note, so who actually led those discussions in the classroom? Were they teachers, or were they Sadira that came in, or what did that involve?
Yeah, so we're very lucky in my team. I have a project officer on Communities That Care who has a teaching background, but you don't need to have a teaching background, because we're never, the teacher is present in the room. And what we're trying to do moving forward, we're trying to do a model that we don't deliver both sessions, so we deliver one session and then the teacher delivers the second session. So we're just lucky. Sadira is unable to deliver it. They can support coming to the room, but I think with their policies and practices, they're unable to deliver it because they've already got their own version.
I was wondering.
Yeah, so. Yeah, and we generally go with, we've had a lot of students that have been really great, so they've been supporting Wendy to deliver in the schools as well. So that's the process, but we'll probably change that next year moving forward.
Did anyone have any questions for Julia when you saw a few minutes left? Yep.
It was great to see that you got the ads in the newspaper. Like, I was thinking about the photograph of that bus stop ad right in the centre. So what happened as a result? What's happened as a result of this publicity? Have the ads actually come down, or do they still stay up? Like, what
the ads generally come down, and they come down quite fast once you draw attention to them. But we have a much longer term view of the role of drawing attention to those kinds of ads. It's about the public and decision makers being aware that there is a problem here, and that the problem is the existing self-regulation, and that we need effective regulation. So that's, to us, that's the point of raising awareness of terrible ads. It's not, the short term aim is taking the ad down,
but it's a
But
lot.
it just gets
It's bigger than that.
replaced.
Exactly. So, I mean, nobody's monitoring alcohol advertising. As in, there's no official process of monitoring. The current system is completely reliant on complaints from the public, which is obviously useless. It's just, you're not going to regulate anything effectively that way. So yeah, people letting us know when there are terrible examples just helps keep it as a current issue and another opportunity to show how awful the current regulation is and what needs to happen. So, and I think a lot of that has played into the fact that state governments have taken on that issue and are doing what they can by removing it from public transport. So I think it is having an effect, but there's still a way to go to get at the federal level to get them to accept the need for a new approach to regulation. These things take time, but everything that that groups do along the way helps build towards that progress.
Julianne, thanks very much. Thanks, Kelly, too. Just to get an understanding in regards to that differentiation between the bus stops and public transport, where is that, or is that just state government, handballing it, or is it actually in the realm of local government? Is it, and is that the act?
So local governments have contracts. Well, our understanding is that many local governments that have bus stops with advertising capabilities have their own contracts with an outdoor advertising company. So the contract sits at the local government. With Transperth buses and around Transperth train stations, those contracts are with the state government. So the state government has acted to so that it's their bus advertising contract from next year.
It's weird that it's not part of the public transport, the actual bus shelter or the bus stop itself.
They're separate.
How is that delineated?
Yeah. So it is a bit messy. I think the state governments could have legislated to come over the top of their local government contracts. That's what we had hoped for. But it seems to be there's much more of an appetite to do it through contract negotiations. There's our understanding of the local government contracts with outdoor advertising companies is also that these contracts that they enter into are really long term. They're like 15 years. So you need to get in there before the current contract finishes so that they have time to prepare. So when they have a new contract negotiation tender process, that they're ready and in a strong position to ensure that that new contract excludes alcohol advertising. It sounds quite simple. It's been more challenging than
no, I don't think it sounds simple at all. And the Local Government Act is being reviewed right now. Is there a possibility of putting it in there?
I think in local governments' public health plans, I think that may have a role. Local governments having a policy that around alcohol advertising and not advertising alcohol on local government property is an important part of the process, so that when the contract negotiation comes up, the local government's in a strong position to exclude alcohol advertising, because the outdoor advertising companies are very powerful. They have a lot of power in the contracting process, and they don't want exclusions on what they can advertise. So it's taken us a while to kind of understand that, and we're still building that understanding. So there's a need for local governments to prepare. If they want to go down that route, there's some steps to take to be in a strong position.
And has any local governments achieved this?
Not as far as we're aware yet, but it's going to happen.
Process
So I was just going to add to that. So we're working, so I just wanted to acknowledge the state's big support that your organisation's providing us. So so my name's Esther and I'm from the East Metro Health Service, and we're working with the cities and Gospels, Armidale and Canning, and we've developed an alcohol action plan to prevent alcohol-related harm. And we're working with McCusker to actually do a bus stop audit, and we're currently having those conversations around developing like a policy framework so that when the contracts come up that we can consider looking at those exclusions. So I'm hoping that, that...
Absolutely. I think this is a really exciting opportunity where, I hope you have noticed it. Our team is very enthusiastic about
absolutely.
this.
So I'm really grateful for
you
guys on board.
Because we need to get the first ones over the line, and then, as I said, I think a lot will follow. We need to show that it's possible. We know that theoretically it's possible, but we need to show that it can be done through an actual local government making it happen. But there are ones that want to make it happen, but we recognise that it's, there is work involved and challenges to overcome. We will get there. And when they do, there's going to be a lot of song and dance about it. We know about it.
Well, thank you, Julia and Kelly. Simone's had to run off and catch a flight, but I think it's definitely evident that today's the research and the policy and the practice point of view across alcohol-related harm in youth, we're doing great things, but we can do even better together if we advocate for things like that.